Hello and welcome back to Endurance Minded. So excited to introduce you to today's guest. We have Alfredo Borodowski, and just such an incredibly dynamic individual. He's an international speaker and author and a coach specializing in peak performance through positive psychology. He turns complex ideas into simple, actionable insights, and he thrives in breaking down the moments when people gain clarity. He works with leaders of organizations, teams, individuals, couples, and first and foremost, we talk about how his journey from being the rabbi of one of the largest and most prestigious congregations in the United States to being an expert in positive psychology. The journey that got him there is dynamic and wild and entertaining. And once we get to the place where we understand what positive psychology is, how it impacts our lives, the framework around how we can use it, Alfredo and I dive deep into some of the key components of how this can impact your life in a positive way. We talk about how we need to shift from a culture of fixing to a culture of nourishing. Incredibly insightful. The language there, I'm sure you can hear, is just ripe for a dynamic conversation. We live in a culture that is consumed with fixing people, fixing problems. Alfredo suggests that we should shift and can shift into a culture of nourishing what is already working, leaning into our strengths, recognizing what we're already good at. Certainly we can work on our weaknesses, but when we are represented by our strengths, it truly changes how we think about things, how we see the world, how we're represented in the world. Alfredo talks about strength blindness, which is on the heels of this idea of a culture of nourishing, that we just don't understand what our strengths are. He states that over 70% of people are suffering from what he calls strengths blindness, which is that we truly just don't know what we're good at. We don't know what our strengths are, how we're supposed to show up in the world. And so that changes how we communicate, how we operate, how we set goals. And we go on to talk about everything from how we handle our fears around artificial intelligence. Alfredo and I talk about what it means to continue to leverage human values and human capital as it relates to evolving technology. We talk about how not to punish yourself. Focus on what is already working. Focus on what you're good at. And then he provides a way for all of us to understand what our top 5 key strengths are. We'll put those in the show notes. He also talks about that in the episode itself, but through positive psychology and a reference that Alfredo has, you can actually walk away with what your 5 strengths are. So just an incredibly dynamic individual with a story that is begging to be told, and he truly just wants to help people. We connected on so many different topics, and it was truly an honor and a pleasure to have him on the show, someone with such expertise, but also so much humility and curiosity. So incredible opportunity, and I truly hope you enjoy my conversation with Alfredo. I'm very, very genuinely and truly excited to talk today. Your expertise is going to be so applicable to the folks that are listeners of this podcast. We love to talk about the intersection of high performance and reaching our full potential, and all of the nuances and dynamics of what makes us our best selves, and then what are some of the things that stop us from being the best versions of ourselves. And I know that you're going to have a lot to contribute to that topic in general, but I want to start where I like to start with a lot of the guests on this show, with your story. Specifically, I know that the road that led you to where you're at today, and your expertise, and the things that you talk about, and where you show up and support folks all around the world, and organizations and relationships, and all of the different places that you're you're committed to supporting others. I know that the road that got you there is a little bit dynamic, and so I'd love for you to just kick us off by sharing that story. I think it's fascinating, and I think that's one of the things that connects us most to people is story. So if you don't mind, I'd love to start there.
Well, Tyler, I never expected to become an expert on peak performance and positive psychology. I was living my life on top of the world. I came from Argentina, from middle class, and I was sitting at my office in Manhattan facing Central Park. I would come every morning with a coffee, put my feet on the desk, look through the window, and say, Alfredo, you made it. You made it big. And then I never thought about peak performance or positivity because I was there. For me, it was natural, was part of life. Mm-hmm. Until one morning, the morning of June 19th, 2013. That morning changed my life. I was arrested. I was at that point the rabbi of one of the largest congregations in the States, a most prestigious one. My congregants were CEOs of top companies, MetLife, Prime Media. I had half of Wall Street as my congregants and lawyers from the most prestigious big firms in Manhattan. Again, couldn't ask for more. And that morning of June 19th, 2013, when I was arrested, I'd been for 2 months driving through the highways of Westchester in New York, telling people how to drive. What happened is that a congregant of mine who was a retired policeman gave me one of those family and friends badges. Mm-hmm. And I was wrongly medicated and I was manic. And I went through tremendous mania and a badge, and I began impersonating a police officer and telling people how to drive.
Wow.
And I was arrested, and I was fired from my job. I was hospitalized, suicidal. I was diagnosed bipolar. And my friends turned their back to me. All the engagements I had workshops and seminars, and I used to lecture through the country, all was canceled overnight. Because I was a rabbi of a prestigious congregation, the press made a circus out of me, and they called me the road rage rabbi. And I made it, Tyler, to front page newspapers in Japan and Ireland as the road rage rabbi. Again, I didn't touch anybody, no violence, involved, but, I was a rabbi and impersonating a police officer, and my life was demolished, I would say, in 2 weeks. And I went into deep depression, and for 8 months, I was on a fetal position on my couch. Tyler, complete darkness, obscurity, no sense of purpose or future. I was like at the end of everything. Until one morning, and I can't tell you how, I stood from my couch and like something pushed me to go upstairs to my study. And I stood in front of my desk and I saw something that, again, I am not sure how it got there. Was a yellow folder. And I took it, I opened it, and I read a positive psychology test I had taken a few years earlier. And I read on the test my top 5 strengths: creativity, love of learning, curiosity, perseverance, and courage. And Tyler, something inside of me turned on, and I said to myself, Alfredo, for the last 8 months, you forgot who you were. It was there on this paper, my strength. And less than a month after that, I went back to school. I was 53 to become a social worker. And in the midst of depression and with 4 court cases, because I have 4 arrests, I went back to school. And I went through school, wow, the highest grades. Basically, I was given an award, the most prestigious award for the most inspirational leader of my class. And then I went to positive psychology, which is what I do now. And I said, everybody must know their top 5 strengths of positive psychology. It will really change. Your potential will become actualized. And that's what I experienced. I can tell you from what it did for me. And I wanted to go and share it with everybody out there.
Wow. What a 180. Yeah.
Oh,
from
yeah.
from front page, not the type of front page news that I'm sure you wanted or maybe were even used to from your, I'm sure you had
You
made the
don't really-
newspaper previously, but for very different reasons. Yeah.
I don't keep clips of those newspapers, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to see, my parents who do not know a word of English, and they were in Argentina, and they were seeing everything from afar. I mean, and, that maybe was the most painful thing I had to witness.
Mm-hmm.
How they couldn't be next to me, and they were not understanding fully what was happening, and they were flooded with, because I was like in 100 articles in newspapers, all
Mm-hmm.
over social media, and they were getting fed with all the social media and couldn't make sense out of it. That maybe, among the different pains I went through, maybe that's one of the deepest ones. What my
Wow.
parents had to go through.
Sure. Yeah. No, I could see that. What Let's take a second. I'd love for you to just maybe define and give us a bit of context for what positive psychology is so that we have a baseline for one, why that was so impactful in your own life, and two, for some of what I'd love to kind of expand on and get your thoughts on. So what is it, and what role does it play for both for yourself as well as for individuals?
In 1998, at that point, Martin Seligman, who was the president of the Association of Psychologists of America, you may say the top psychologist in America, on his presidential address to the Convention of Psychologists, he challenged them. And he said something amazing. He said, for 100 years, psychology has dealt with all our problems: neurosis, psychosis, depression, anxiety, everything that is wrong with us. And that's great, because psychology has helped a lot of people who are in pain, are suffering. But he said, but why only the negative? It is like we are only negative people, and our psyche doesn't have a positive half.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, basically, psychology is not fulfilling its duty fully. We are not helping people to be the most resilient, the happiest, optimists, courageous. There were at this point, there were not studies, basically, and papers and journals writing about the positive side of life. And he said, I challenge all of you to begin now writing and exploring and giving people the gift of what is good with them and how to maximize it. And he gathered a group of great minds, sociologists, people from religion, philosophy, social workers, psychologists, to have a think tank to study the virtues and strengths of humanity throughout time and geography. They study the Bible, they study the Boys and Girl Scouts manifestos, they study religious books of all kinds, philosophical books, they even study Harry Potter, all looking for the core values of humanity, and there are thousands of them. But they found 24 strengths that are repeated across time and geography, that they became the 24 core strengths of positive psychology, which all of us have. All of us have those strengths. And what is amazing and even upsetting, I would say, Tyler, is that in studies, 70% of Americans are not aware of their top 5 strengths. 70%. Okay, 7 out of 10 people are unaware of their top strengths. There is an epidemic of strength blindness. And I say that it's upsetting because research also shows that if you know your strengths, just knowing them gives you 9 times more power to flourish. Knowing them, applying them 18 times more power to flourish, which means that 7 out of 10 people are performing and living a life minus 9 of what they potentially could achieve using what they already have, which is all that's upsetting because it's not that they need to learn anything. They're already using in some way their strengths, but because they are not aware of them, they cannot use them in an intentional way. And by not being intentional, they don't use it at their full potential. And it takes 15 minutes to know your strengths, by the way. It's not going to therapy for 10 years. It's an easy way to do it. I will share how, but we need to understand that we have a serious problem. We talk about peak performance, okay? Look, let's talk about peak performance after we at least know our top 5 strengths. Forget about peak performance if we are not even aware of what your top 5 strengths are. Peak performance with that kind of ignorance becomes a dream, a luxury, okay?
I'm eager to learn more about the 5 strengths, but one of the things that struck me that you said, and I had read this in some of your other work, is the phrase that you use, which is strength blindness. And it's when you say it, one, it is 70% of people don't know their strengths. There's kind of two, I have 2 reactions. One, of course, is that that is it's striking. You're like that 70% of people don't know. That's an appalling quantitative metric to think that, like you said, 7 out of 10 people are walking around with no real firm understanding of what makes them great, what their strengths are, how they can reach their full potential, peak performance, like you said. The other thing that strikes me or that I think about is why, why, how did we get here? Maybe specifically, as an American culture, why are the overwhelming majority of individuals in this place? So can you shed a little light on the why?
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
culturally.
Yes, I had spent a lot of time on that question, Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to the conclusion that at least one of the main reasons is because we have created a culture of fixing instead of a culture of nurturing.
Mm.
Okay, I remember when I was in high school, like twice a year, my parents used to go to school and talk with the different teachers I had. History, psychology, geometry, physics, to see how I was doing. And I remember they would come back home and they will tell me, and my parents love me, you did well except for.
Right.
Okay. They went straight to what I was not doing right. And that's actually what we are finding also on reviews at companies and corporations, that managers are zooming immediately on the weakness of the person they supervise, instead of bringing up what is best in them to maximize their potential. Now, we know that if you go to what is broken or what you perceive to be a weakness, from that perspective, it's very difficult to achieve greatness. But we know that you begin what is working and what is strong, then you can fix weaknesses. Give an example. I'm an MMA practicing. I practice MMA, mixed martial arts. Okay, I am very serious, Tyler. Like train 6 times a week. But I am 61, and everybody else is below 25.
Yeah.
Okay, then I cannot kick high. Like you kick a lot, mixed martial art. I cannot really kick very high. I already, my hips are not flexible as they used to be. Mm-hmm. Then when I go into a fight, everybody kicks my head, and I cannot kick back. Then I went to my coach and I said, I am quitting. My disadvantage is too big. I cannot do it. He said, no, Alfredo, you're not aware that your jab is one kind of punch, the jab, and your low kick below the waist is one of the best here in the gym. I said, really? Oh, yeah. He said, your jab is the fastest and stronger, and you kick so well that I want you to concentrate your training and your energy on low kick and jab and defense. That's what you're great at. Then I began concentrating on jab, low kick, and defense. You know something? Doing great. Doing great. Now, because I am doing great at my jab and low kick, I began now a routine of flexibility on my legs. And I am kicking a little bit higher.
Sure.
And if I continue, I will kick a little bit higher than that. Now, if we would have concentrated on, well, you cannot kick high, that's a disadvantage, then I would have quit MMA. Okay, then the reason that we do not know the strengths is that we have a culture of fixing rather than nourishing. We need to change that paradigm. Okay, supervising is helping and mentoring the other achieve their full potential through the strengths. Not trying to help the other by controlling and exercising power, by trying to fix the other. Clearly, we need to have standards and excellence, but there is a difference between expected excellence and full dedication and a culture where zooming with vigor into what the other is not doing well And then self-esteem goes down, and blindness of strength follows because you stop believing in yourself, because the people who are supposed to help you be your best are constantly telling you how you fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we think we're doing good. It seems on the surface like that type of feedback is in service of the other individual. If I highlight where they're doing wrong, then they can go fix it. To your point, a culture of fixing. But that's really interesting to see. I mean, when you describe it, it is easy to see how, if you just continue to, in essence, kind of harp on people's um, deficiencies, then that's what they're going to focus on. One of the things I always like to say is, what we focus on, we'll find,
Right.
right? And I'm sure you've read. If we go out and look for good in the world, we'll find good. If we go out and look for negativity, we'll find negativity. This applies to all areas of your life, right? It's amazing how when you start to, shift your perspective, well, lo and behold, there's a lot of things that support that in one direction or other, be them positive or negative. So in that regard, it's easy to see, how, like this culture of, and I mean, how many, thinking about it from school age onward, right? We've really been conditioned to provide feedback through the lens of weaknesses. You get it in school. You need to up your grades in this. You're not doing good. No one says you got an A in geography. They say, well, you got a C in math, right? And so you're just constantly bombarded, and then parents and so on. And and then it goes into the workplace. That's really, really interesting. What are Is there, I mean, other than shifting the language that we use, can you give us just maybe a tactical tool of how to shift that, in practice? Because it's so ingrained. I mean, hearing now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, oh, our entire life, for I think most cultures, right, have been this kind of negativity. So how do we shift that into the nourishment
Yeah,
aspect of things?
I tell you what I do with companies, because when companies call me to work, let's say, with a sales team that is not performing. It was one of the latest assignments where it was a big corporation called me. Their sales team was not performing. They were actually number 2 on their segment, and the CEO saw that they had potential to be number 1. But the team was already happy to be number 2. They were not hungry. That's what the word that the CEO used. They're not hungry, and they don't believe they can be number 1. Okay. Then what did I do with the team, which I think is applicable to every aspect of life? The first of all, we did a strength diagnosis. Everybody in the team got the top 5 strengths. Okay, then the first thing we do is to end strength blindness. Okay, then everybody got, like I got my top 5 at that desk, that changed my life. Then everybody at the team got the top 5 strengths. Okay, then that by itself, technically, 9 times higher percentage of energy and flourishing just by being aware, by internalizing. Then something I like to do, they go around the table and they introduce themselves. But I ask them to introduce themselves in a different way. Even people who have known each other and been working for years, they get amazed by this. I said, go around the table and say, my name is John. My top strength is, and this is what I bring to the company from the perspective of my top strengths. It changed the entire dynamics, Tyler, because they had never been given a chance to say what they are great at. and to define themselves from that perspective. They always define themselves from their function. Okay, what I do, but not who I am and what is best in me. And there is humor when people do that. There is such an energy in the room, and it's like they get to know each other for the first time. And then you need to create the habits of strength. And then, for example, I recommend that teams that they begin their meetings. This company had a weekly meeting. Okay, then beginning with last week, I used this one of my top strengths in this way, and to begin changing the language about how they see each other, the lenses through which they become to each other a strength person. Then I give them as an exercise, which I find it amazing the results these have, to stop 3 times a day and write down on a piece of paper which strength you used the half an hour before. And do that for 5 days. 1 week, 1 week of work, and at the end of the week to see the pattern of strength you use and when. And you're going to see how you use your top strengths when, in which pattern, with which intensity, and that's going to help you maximize the use of your strengths according to research by 18. Then it's a process of self-awareness, group awareness, and changing some habits and looking at others in a different way.
I love that stopping and reflecting piece. I think it's one of the things that I've talked a fair amount about on this podcast is celebrating small wins, the kind of exercise of recognizing or developing the really kind of muscle, so to speak, of not just that big win at the end of the road, this 1 year goal, but really developing the habit of seeing the wins daily and how they stack together. And I think that really is almost a kind of a great complement to that exercise, is to really to understand how you're showing up in your strengths consistently so that you can shift that mental framework that we all have set up, which is to look for the things we're not doing well. You start to see, oh, this is how I'm deploying these strengths in a very real way. I love that. That's great. And I could see how that really starts to shift, team dynamics when there's a shared language of strengths versus a shared language of deficits or weaknesses.
Exactly. A shared language of strengths. That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I'm gonna use that. It's because I think it's something that we're not. And I'd be curious to get your take on this, but I think high performers, I'll use that as kind of a catch-all, but people that are goal-oriented, that are driven, that are focused and engaged, we tend to really default to, this is what I'm not doing well. I'm not getting there fast enough. I need to do more. There's always this kind of, next layer, next level where we feel like we're always behind the 8 ball a bit, right? We're always kind of digging ourselves out of a hole. And I think what you're describing is a much different approach to and dynamic that allows us to see that even in the process of reaching those goals, albeit however lofty they are, we can recognize that we're really still achieving greatness. We're still in alignment with our strengths. Is that fair? Would that be an appropriate way to think about how we could just kind of use this as almost like stacking kind of bricks day after day when we're in pursuit?
You use the key word, which is alignment. Okay, we have to be aligned, and I'm going to explain this. But look, the bottom line is that you can be at your company, at your team, a good person, a person who pursues the happiness of others, a manager that elevates the strength of others, a boss that brings optimism, a boss that cares about flourishing, and at the end of the day, from research, we do not only know that you should be that because it's a good thing to do as a human being, you should do it because increases production and results. Mm-hmm. Okay, which is what we know now from science. Then I tell, I do coaching with CEOs, and I tell them, I want you to be a good person to others. But I tell you something, you're in a business, and we know from research that doing good for others and making other people happy in their job is going to increase your bottom line. Mm-hmm. What we call psychological capital. Another kind of capital. And we know from research today that psychological capital brings productive revenue because people's well-being make people happier, more committed, more loyal, less turnover, more resilience, and more results. Then today from science, we have an incentive to do all the good things and the nice things, not only because of the goodness of your heart, which should be enough, but because it's a good and sound business decision. Good and sound business decision. Now, I have a formula that I shared with you before we met, which for peak performance, which is a little bit different, which is based on this new approach I bring, or different approach I bring, which is peak performance is positivity plus purpose equals peak performance. Positivity plus purpose equals peak performance. Then performance, you began talking about this, Tyler. Performance is usually seen as overcoming a barrier through some kind of pain. Then peak performance is the product of sacrifice and pain. And you had to overcome a pressure to get somewhere that you are not allowed to be in now. I'm bringing a different dynamics here. We begin with positivity, which is excelling through what you already are good at, which are your strengths. Okay, not coming from back, but maximizing what's already working. Because we know one of the laws of positive psychology is that you get more from investing in what it works than investing the same amount in what doesn't work. It's a great principle. Okay, yeah. You get more revenue from investing in what it works than from trying to fix what it doesn't work. Then the first part of the equation is positivity, know your strengths and maximize them. And the second that has to do with alignment is purpose. And purpose is one of the most misunderstood concepts. Purpose first is confused with objective. The purpose, the objective of something. And that's a misreading of purpose. Purpose comes first. That's the mantra that you should remember. Purpose comes first. And what is purpose? Purpose is giving the best of yourself for the benefit of others. Giving the purpose of what all we do, the real purpose, the true purpose, who you are, is to give the best of what you have for the benefit of others. Purpose is a toolkit. The toolkit you have in yourself of your best qualities and your strengths for the benefit of others. And if you do that, you don't get success. And that's why people feel empty at the end. because they use purpose for success. And at the end, they reach the goal and they say, I feel nothing. I feel emptier than before, and I need a new goal. No, the result of positivity plus purpose is fulfillment. And fulfillment always comes from somebody else. And usually comes in three ways. The first is gratitude. When you give the best of yourself with your strength and somebody comes back to you and say, you made a difference in my life. Okay, that's the greatest fulfillment. When somebody else comes and say, because of you taught me, or you you gave me, the way you mentor me, the way you were for me at the point where I was in the lowest, and you stood by me, that's the greatest fulfillment. The second level of fulfillment is growth. When you see somebody growing through what you do, they don't come back saying thank you to you, but you witness it. Usually that happens. Usually parents know what I'm talking about. You do it for our kids and we don't expect a thank you. Mm-hmm. And the third level of fulfillment is when you feel satisfied inside, fulfilled inside for what you've done. And that usually only 10%. Okay. And that's what most people are looking for. The inner satisfaction, when we know from studies that the greatest fulfillment comes from people coming to you and saying what you done to me, then you put together positivity plus purpose in your work and in what you do, that's like nitrogen and oxygen on a rocket. That's going to bring you to the most energy, motivation, and peak performance.
I love that. A fulfillment piece. That's something I've experienced personally. You work towards this thing that you think is going to be the kind of be all end all. You build a business and exit that business and maybe you think that's going to be the thing, or some sort of physical pursuit. You work and you accomplish the goal, and as you're saying, in my own experience, what ends up happening is that thing doesn't feel as good as you thought it was going to feel. It doesn't solve your problems. There's a short little blip of this is great, and then just on the other side of that is really a big drop off. You actually, in my experience, you feel worse than you did before, because there's this recognition, again from my experience, that this didn't solve my problems. Now I'm going to actually sink lower than I was before, because I'm now under the realization that all this work and energy and effort didn't actually create the outcome that I thought. And that it just really resonates, the fulfillment component, of what you're describing, and really that so much of that is connection with others as well, and I think certainly from my own perspective or from my own experience, that's the piece that I've largely missed, in earlier in my life, these times when I really felt like I missed the mark, because I didn't, there wasn't that fulfillment, that mentorship piece. There wasn't that just let me add value because because it's meaningful, not what can you do for me, but just because it's something that truly makes me feel good. And I know that I can do it and make an impact. It is what I'm describing, the kind of the antithesis to what you're talking about. I mean, am I getting that right? That's really the kind of, yours is the solution to again, my own personal experience there of feeling like I really missed it.
I don't know if it's a solution. Look, I want people to do great. Okay, Don't get me wrong. I want people to succeed. Okay, and to achieve their dreams. What happened is that dreams and goals need to respond to a set of strengths and values. That they need to be a reflection of it. when success becomes the goal in itself, and achievement becomes the goal in itself, without the back of the values and purpose, then basically it's emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we are. We know from science that kind of 50% of our happiness is genetic. There are people who are born with more happy genes than others. What is good about it is that you have bad, don't have a lot of happy genes. That genes are not determining. They're not fixed. You have to express them. Our brain is malleable to the end of days. Then you can work on modifying your predisposition. Okay, that's good. But 50% comes from factory, from birth, although it's not set in stone. Then 10% comes from external things, the kind of job you have, success, the kind of house, the kind of car, only 10%. And 40% comes from inner work, comes from attitude, comes from wisdom. Then that's fantastic. We have 40% that we can grow on happiness and fulfillment out of how much we mature, how much we help others. That's a big number. Okay. What happened is that we created a society focusing on the 10%.
Mm-hmm.
We have confused the 10% with the 40%. That's, we need to turn that equation around. Okay. Now it's not about not having goals, and it's not about, not succeeding. I want people to succeed. And to work hard and to do well, but they need to do it in a way where there is an alignment. That word I used before that I said is crucial, an alignment between their strengths and values and their goals. And that's where today we are having basically a short circuit. It's interesting also, some recent studies that the part of the brain, the circuit in the brain that works for desire is different than the one that works for satisfaction. And what happens? The one for desire is more complex than the one for satisfaction. Which means when we desire something, we will work for it with a lot of strength. It's the most sophisticated one, is a more complex one, but the satisfaction part of the brain is less complex and then less. It's less sophisticated. Then there is a mismatch within the desire part and the satisfaction part. Then we may work for 10 years for that, for that position at the company. Okay. And then when we get there, a different kind of the brain operates, which is less sophisticated and basically goes away very fast. Okay. Then again, how you solve that? Alignment with values, alignment with strengths. Because that's where you are more authentic. And authenticity is what people are looking for, by the way. I hear it all the time. Authenticity. How are you authentic? The best of yourself plus the best yourself for the benefit of others.
I love that definition. That's great. Yeah, that word authentic certainly gets thrown around a lot. I think having a firm, definitive equation or definition of that is really helpful, because I think that I'm sure you've experienced that as well. It gets interpreted very differently depending on the audience, right? The way that one individual shows up, I'll use in quotes, authentically versus someone else, and how that actually serves them and those that they are showing up authentically for can be wildly different, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So I love that. That's very helpful to think about that in the context of a, you know, kind of an equation. So we're talking about strengths. I'd love to help us understand how we can discover our 5 strengths.
Very easy. And I tell you what, very easy. I used to give a website for people to go and find their strengths. And then I realized with my last name, Borodowski, I am having myself always problems spelling it. My own last name, okay? Then I made it so easy. Anybody listening, if they would just text, they take their phone and they text the word positive to the number 33777. They did text positive to 33777. They will get a chart with the 24 strengths of positive psychology, and they will get 2 easy steps to determine the top strengths, plus a couple of exercises of how to use them in the daily life and maximize them. Very easy. It's called Textiful. It's a new program. You just have one word that you love. Clearly, my word is positive. Mm-hmm. And then they give you a number that you can remember, 33777. And that's all.
I love that. Great. We'll put that in the show notes so people can get a hold of that. That's excellent. I want to change gears a little bit as we kind of round out our conversation here. Or let's change gears, more kind of build off of what we're talking about. So we're talking about people's strengths. We're talking about how to, show up authentically, all these amazing tools that we can use to shift from that, focusing on our weaknesses to focusing on our strengths. Well, one of the things that is certainly top of people's mind right now and is technology, and specifically artificial intelligence, and how that may or may not, or could or couldn't impact how people show up in the world. How might that, in people's minds, so many are thinking, how might that diminish my strengths? How might that diminish how I'm able to show up, or the value that I bring? And I know that you talk about how to overcome that fear by really elevating the human value. And so I'd love for you to just give me an overview of what that perspective shift can look like. Maybe define that for us, what that human value piece is. It's top of mind for so many people, and it is our reality, and it is, I think, an incredible tool, but we certainly need to understand the context in which we live within a world where artificial intelligence is a very real and a very meaningful thing. So what does that look like? How does that human value show up in a world of AI?
I don't know, Tyler, why I expected that question. I somehow expected the question. Look, every time humanity went through a technological revolution, and I'm talking about the first printed books, okay, the Industrial Revolution, etc., etc. Every time we felt that was the end of the world. Okay, when the first book came out, there was a counter printing voice very strong in the world that now information would be accessible to everybody and would create chaos and distraction and too open minds. The minds would be too open and too much knowledge. And then, when the Industrial Revolution came, the fears were that basically people were going to be enslaved, and become machines in factories and lose their humanity, a little bit like today. Then my take on AI is that in the long run, is going to make us exponentially better than what we are. I have positive views. Like if we use it right, it's going to maximize what we are doing, our creativity. Look, I use Chat GTP. Okay. I don't ask Chat GTP to do things for me from scratch. But today, this morning, I wrote a proposal for the company. I wrote it myself. I put it through Chat GTP and said, polish it and make it more clear and understandable. Hey, wow. That used to take me 3 hours. Now it takes me half an hour. Then that is half an hour I can use to read more and to write more and to connect with people more. Then I do believe that AI is going to give us a chance to bring our game really, really, really much and much on top. But there is going to be pain. There are people who, there's going to be a transition. And there are people who are going to lose their jobs. There are companies who are going to commit the mistake of replacing humanity with technology. And I read an article yesterday, by the way, about how some companies already are paying the price and beginning to realize that they brought AI too fast. Okay, and now they have a vacuum of humanity in them. Then it's going to be a redefinition of what work is. It's going to be a redefinition. It's going to be painful, and people are going to suffer from it. I don't think that it's avoidable. I think that there are some people who are going to thrive and take advantage and read reality and transform, okay, and transition and be better than ever, understanding the new opportunities and the new technology. That's the game, by the way. You know, that's the game of a free society, okay? But when I go to companies to talk today, I am very clear that companies that do not focus on the strength of people, and they're not people-centered and value-centered and strength-centered, will not succeed. I am convinced about that. That the companies that are going to succeed are the ones who use the AI in combination with the best of positive psychology and humanity. Okay? Now, we humans, you know, sometimes people say, you know, I want to work from home. Okay? You know, offsite. You know, I don't like that my boss wants me to go to, you know, to the office. Well, in some ways, that's paradoxical, because more you are not there and interact with others and create a community within your work, then less you make humanity to be present in the place where you don't want to be replaced by technology. You can have it. You can have that cake and eat it. Okay, right. Then we can't do that. Then it's going to be. I am optimistic because I am positive psychology. We are optimistic. We are not naive, but I am optimistic. AI is going to bring us to new heights. It's going to be painful. There are going to be great opportunities. And the companies that are going to do great are the ones who can integrate AI, but understand that humanity is going to become a luxury. And when humanity becomes a luxury, you must have it because it's going to be more precious than ever. Okay, then actually in these dynamics, humanity is going to become more precious. And the companies that to understand how precious it's going to be are going to have happy workers, committed workers, loyal workers, motivated workers. And as we know, that brings more productivity and success.
That's great. I love that. I couldn't agree more. I'm very much pro technology, and you know, I'm very much in alignment that I think that it is just an incredible bandwidth expander to be able to then free up that time to go do other meaningful things that maybe would have otherwise, or just in not the not so recent past, would have bogged us down. And then that there is no replacing that humanity, and it becomes a very valuable commodity in a sense as we continue to leverage technology to do these things that maybe just even medial tasks, the things that keep us from connecting, we can outsource those in a sense and spend more time doing what humans do best, which is building relationships and making an impact in the world and giving back to others. And
Right.
so that's I love that perspective. I think that it's very much a bright future where we continue to be able to just recognize and lean into the things that we do best, and leverage technology to help us be better, like you said, and really raise the bar.
Outside of companies in our life, let's AI do our jobs that have to do with editing, okay, and doing proposals and doing recipes and do things, and let's concentrate more on love, connecting with each
Mhm.
other, okay, compassion, which AI cannot give to us. And then
Mhm.
let's set the time that is liberated for us on those issues. Let's use it to be more human. Okay, that's the opportunity.
Absolutely, I think that's incredible. Well, that's a high note to end on. It's an optimistic, like you said, you're an optimist. That's an optimistic note to end on. Alfredo, this has been incredible. I can't thank you enough for your time. I appreciate your expertise and your insight, and thanks for making time for us. It's been a pleasure.
Tyler, thank you. I really felt like you said at the beginning, it's like having coffee, virtual coffee, and talking with a friend, and that's the way it felt. And
Beautiful.
I think that you brought out of me, challenging me with good questions, great questions, to bring some of what makes me passionate about. And I hope that those listening learn something and find the strengths and excel in life and achieve their dreams.
I love that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alfredo. This has been incredible, and thank you for the kind words. And I can't wait to make sure that our listeners are able to connect with you and learn more about their strengths. If we can move through the world just even marginally more connected to those things versus what we need to fix, I think that that's going to make elevate everyone's experience in life. So, thanks again.
Thank you.